Thanks for coming, for enduring all these days, and here on the last official day, late in the day, showing up. I have projected behind me the outline that should be available to you on your app or your computer, on your phone, whatever your device is. I am not going to try to say every word that's on this outline. I think it's too much. I'm going to try to cover the main ideas, but we'll try to do it maybe with a little less detail and hopefully clearer. So to start, I'm actually going to work through most of that first paragraph there that was before there ever was an outline. That was the description of this workshop. And those first 5 words, conflict need not be feared. We need to spend some time on that. In my country, we avoid conflict whenever possible. Now, some of us know that's not a great idea, so we look for conflict, but that doesn't mean we do it well. We just, people get afraid of those people because they're intimidating. They're just looking for a fight. But we're going to have to spend some time with fearing conflict, what that looks like. Conflict need not be feared, but can be seen as an opportunity for refining the marriage relationship. Seen as an opportunity. Now that's kind of an unusual idea. So we'll spend some time with that. Many couples view conflict as an enemy because they make the mistake that the disconnection they feel in difficult moments is the only thing that happens and is the only product of conflict. It's not fun to be in conflict, to be in intense conflict. Even if you've gotten too upset and you've withdrawn and you're not even talking, it's just not fun. It doesn't feel good, it's painful. It's difficult. It's easy to make that mistake, to think that this painful feeling that we have here because we've been in conflict means conflict's a bad idea. So we'll have to spend some time with that. Avoiding disconnection shouldn't really be the priority. We feel that disconnection when we are in conflict. So we want to avoid it. So therefore we avoid the conflict. But avoiding that disconnection really isn't the priority. It should be the other way around. Go for the connection is what we're going to take a look at. Or, maybe more importantly, one of the most important words in that paragraph is repairing. Couples who have gotten to places where they're in conflict a lot, it's not really producing agreement. They just fight, get to a place where it seems useless to continue, go away, calm down, just to come back and fight again. Maybe about a different thing, but it looks like the same fight. They are having a hard time of coming to a place of really being of like mind. That doesn't mean you have to agree. But you need to be able to get to a place of how are we going to look at this and make decisions about what are the things that we see aren't really going to change, and we have to find a way to live together with the fact that we look at things differently. The key element in that is to be able to repair the emotional disconnection that's been created through the conflict. If we can repair, we can tolerate the disconnection. The disconnection doesn't have the destructive impact so much if we can repair things. So repair becomes a crucial point. Okay, and that point number 1 there, if I can find my cord. Relationships break down and repair. I'm going to jump to, you can see what I have there, Genesis 2:18. It's not good for man to be alone, not good for people to be alone. implying that we're made for relationship. Then it says, what did don't eat the fruit of the tree require? I believe it required from Adam and Eve faithfulness in relationship to God. In a very real sense, when God said, don't eat the fruit of that tree, He was creating an opportunity for them to be faithful. We might think of it as obedience. It is, but it's more than that. It's not just simple obedience. Oh, God made a rule, we're going to follow the rule. End of story. Now, God is saying, if you listen to what I'm saying something that's for your good, but if you listen to what I'm saying, it will be good for us. You will be agreeing, yes, I'm in a relationship with God. He matters. And what He has said, I can agree with and obey, and therefore be faithful in the relationship that we have with Him. When Adam and Eve made the decision to eat the fruit of that tree, they made the decision to not be faithful in the relationship, to actually rebel in that relationship. So what does God's response to Adam and Eve's rebellion in relationship to Him show us? First thing we see is God comes and seeks them out and asks questions. I grew up in a Christian home and grew up in the church. I've been to church all my life. But my understanding of God as a young person was not very clear. And that's not uncommon. That I had this understanding of a God in the Old Testament and a God in the New Testament that was very different. And the God in the Old Testament was a whole lot more scary. And that image and understanding that I had of God in the Old Testament meant that at this point, I was expecting that scary God to show up. Adam and Eve have done the one thing they weren't supposed to do. Defiantly have done it. And I understood when people said, and God shows up and then He starts pronouncing these curses on them. That sounded like the Old Testament God to me. Maybe those people that were teaching me that had that same vision of that God, not that God who is love, but that God who's a judge, an angry, fiery judge. But that's not what God did. And we can miss what actually happened if we're thinking in terms of that scary God of the Old Testament, like I was in my youth. God instead comes and He seeks them out. I mean, just think about the fact of, here's our God that we understand from Scripture, who can't look at sin, is opposed to sin, will punish sins, He does. And Adam and Eve sin, and He comes seeking them. We see the gracious side of God right there in those first pages of Scripture. And He starts asking questions. If you think of God as being like a parent there, any of you that have children may have had a time where you knew one of your children had been really disobedient. It's a real common thing that a parent will go find that child and will ask questions. One of the reasons we do that is we want the child to actually learn from the experience. We're not looking for the relationship to end. We're not looking to just punish that child, to make them pay for doing wrong, make them pay for not obeying us. We're looking for them to learn. We're looking to love them actually in that moment, to help them become more truer to who God wants them to be. So God, and we like Him, when a child disobeys, He asks questions. Inviting Adam and Eve into a process of thinking about, so what does this mean? What are the consequences now? So God names the consequences in the process. I like the word consequences much better than curses. And states what this is going to mean and the impact of it. And he intervenes to correct the damage done. You see the verses listed there, but the later verses in that chapter 3 of Genesis, there's a verse that most of my life I read over, and I just looked at it as they were cleaning up the details. You know, at the end, that paragraph at the end of a story where someone's sort of wrapping things together and tying it all up. Where God says he made clothes out of skins, out of animal skins for Adam and Eve. It's an amazing statement when I think about it a little more. That this God, that we understand the justice that is inherent in him. We understand that there needs to actually to be a payment for sin. We recognize the justification that Christ's death on the cross actually provided, that it had a legal element to it. And that was still true right here. But God, because of who he is, surely because he knows what Christ is going to do, and he sees ahead to that, but because of who he is, that's not the way he approaches. And he looks and he recognizes the consequence of Adam and Eve's sin, that there's breakdown in their relationship with him and with each other. I mean, Adam's already blamed God and Eve for his sin. And a breakdown in understanding themselves, that something's gotten twisted so that they're standing there saying, you know, with shame. Just previously in chapter 2, it's been stated that they were naked. I think of that as completely known. Naked in being known to each other, as well as naked physically, really, without shame. Completely accepted. Now shame has entered, and they question their acceptance. So they make their efforts to cover their nakedness, which is not just an effort to be clothed, but it's an effort to cover the shame in order to live with the consequences of their sin. And God comes like a parent and says, nice try. I understand why you tried. But it's a little pitiful. Here, let me help you out. What an amazing picture of grace. There was a cost. There were some animals that God kills in order to create these clothes for Adam and Eve from these skins. And God makes clothes for them. What a wonderful picture. I look at that because we see the relationship with Adam and Eve. We see the breakdown in it in their sin. And it does not break it totally, but it twists it and brings in alienation. And we see God acting in order to repair. And of the three of those, the repair may be the most significant piece. I think that's the same in our marriages. That we enter into our marriages and we live in our marriages understanding there will be breakdown. There will be ways that we sin against each other. There'll be things that we do wrong. There'll be ways that we miss each other. It may not be active sin. It may not be things that we even understand to be wrong, but that we miss each other or misunderstand each other. And that is a problem. The reason that this is so significant is that point number 2 there, is that God, in creating this world, made relationships to have a central place in how the world works. That's human relationships, but it's really all relationships. anything you do, anything you interact with, you enter into a relationship with it. At times, when I have time, I will work with wood. I'll make things out of wood. Read a book not too many months ago where the man was talking about if you're going to make something out of a piece of wood, you enter into a relationship with it. You have to. The wood presents limitations on what you can do with it. So you have to enter into a relationship to sort of receive from it what it can become. Reminds me of Michelangelo's in creating the statue David, the sculpture David, out of marble. He actually selected a large piece of marble that had been rejected by other sculptors. But part of the reason he said he selected that piece is that he could see David in it. And he could see that if he could remove the parts that weren't David, he could release David from that stone. That sense of really relating to that piece of stone, that piece of marble, and being able to see its limitations and its potential, actually, then in his relationship with it as that sculptor, taking hammer and chisel, could remove the parts that weren't David. I imagine that for many people for a very long time, if they heard Michelangelo say that, probably scratched their heads a little bit. Does that really make sense? It's just a piece of stone. It's him acting. It's alone. It's not. There's no relationship to that. But I think there actually is, and I think that is the way God has set up the universe. So what I have there, number A there under letter 2, is the operative principle of the universe is relationship. Well, that's a really different way to think. But it's crucial for us in thinking about persons, people. The theologians say persons are made in relationships. The behavioral scientists have come to understand that as they've observed for maybe 50 or 60 years now, mothers with their children, they recognize that the baby, the infant child, the person of that child is being nurtured in the relationship, in the back and forth conversation without words that a mother and a baby has. That baby is learning that they can trust another person. And in that safety and in that trust and being connected at that level, they start to emerge in who they are. One of the things they learn is they can act in a way that impacts that other person, that invites that person to relate to them. And they learn that when they do that, that person, if they care for them, if they're paying attention, responds back. And that process, back and forth, repeated over and over, they learn who they are. They learn that they're valued by someone outside that helps them grow in their heart and their spirit into a sense of, I count. There's something to me. That they have a sense, even though they don't have the vocabulary, I'm a person of value. I make a difference. Without those kinds of relational moments, repeated enough, it's a much harder thing for that person to feel value, to feel that they count, to feel that they count for God or with God if they haven't had that experience humanly. Those relationships make us who we are and make us more, continually make us more. However, one of the things that's difficult for us to understand as point B there is that relationships require conflict. That might not feel right, but it's actually true. I guess I have a couple ways there. I mean, conflict can be destructive, but it also can be productive. But why required? I haven't written anything there, but we need to think about that. My wife's name is Carol Ann. If Carol Ann and I were exactly the same, when I came to some decision point in my life, say, I'm thinking of a time several years ago, where someone had asked me about taking a different job. And I was thinking about that and kind of confused about it, wasn't sure what to do. And in a moment like that, anybody who's thinking about, I might take a different job. If that's a man, his wife, assuming he's married, is an important person in giving him feedback and input in thinking about that decision. I trust Carol Ann probably more than anybody else. And so that's important that I get that feedback. If we're just alike, she's not much help to me then. You know, someone has said, it was an older man, that his wife had said to him, well, if we were the same, I would be irrelevant. I would have nothing to offer. And in a certain sense, that's true. So we need that difference. Now, the truth is, in personality, Carol Ann and I are quite different. And there's a goodness in that and a glory in that. So back those years ago when I was thinking about that job, I was having a hard time. I really came to realize that's not a good job for me. That's not a good fit. And it would be a mistake for me to take that. But I kept avoiding calling that person back to say, no, I'm not going to take that job. When I'd come home and Carol Ann would ask, did you call that guy? No. And I did that for 3, 4, 5 days. I don't remember now exactly. Finally, one day I made that call. I thought I'd kind of figured it out, what was going on, why I was hesitating so much. And on the way home, I called Carol Ann up, and I said, I called. I let that man know, and here's what I figured out. And I explained to her what had come to me that helped me finally take action on this decision that I'd made. And she listened to that, and then she said, I don't think that's it. I don't think that's right. It was really annoying. You know, I was like, I'd taken 4 or 5 days to finally figure out something out, finally thought I had it, and it enabled me to take the action on it, and then she's like, I don't think so. I'm glad you called, but I don't think that's the reason. And then she gave another reason, and she was actually right. I mean, maybe both reasons were right a little bit, but she was more on target. And I remember thinking, I'm so glad that I'm married to this person who sees the world differently and can help me understand it better in the context of our relationship. And I remember thinking, it's still really annoying. And it is. And if she was here, she would probably laugh at that because she understands it. And if I gave her the opportunity, I probably wouldn't. She could tell another story where I can be just as annoying. But she appreciates the fact that I bring something that's a perspective that she doesn't have, that stretches, just as she helped me stretch in my understanding, and actually, in a way, grow more than I would have on my own because we are different. But that feeling of this is annoying is a product of the difference. We always feel more connected, more comfortable in our connection when we're the same. And we know the connection is because of sameness. That's part of the reason we spend so much time talking together to try to get to the same place and to be in agreement. But you can't do that about everything. That's where the conflict is necessary in order to get to a place where you agree that you both have legitimate positions and that you can bring those together productively for the good of both of you, even though you're not going to agree on them. It's hard work. And what it requires, I'm going to flip the page for just a second. I'm not going to change that yet. What it requires is deep connection. To keep working on the connection that we experience, the emotional connection that we experience. It's that disconnection and the feeling of it that leads to us feeling like we're not safe, that scares us from that kind of disagreement, that kind of conflict. And when we're scared like that, conflict does not look like an opportunity. And that point number 3, I'll move that up a little. Conflict is an opportunity, not an automatic enemy to productive relationships. That can sound very strange. Oh, we're having a fight. This is great. This is an opportunity to grow. That can sound pretty strange. I'm thinking that, a couple of us were talking earlier, what about those situations where you've given up hope? Where the disconnection has been growing and you're feeling far apart from each other most of the time. When you've given up hope, that conflict doesn't look like an opportunity. One of the enemies in marriage, let me start differently. One of the allies in marriage, something that helps us in marriage, is the belief that we're married to the person we're supposed to be married to. Now, it's important that we have that belief for the right reasons. The ultimate right reason is to have a real sense that the person you're married to is the person God intended you to marry. If our reason for believing I'm married to the right person is some list of characteristics we were looking for in the right person, and we found somebody that matched those lists, that's not as stable. If that list looks like things that are mostly like us, that's not as stable. Why would that not be stable? When we marry, we get to know each other better, and one of the things that we learn is we misunderstood certain things about it, the person we married. We didn't read it all right. I think of it this way. If you had asked me when I was 22 and Carol Ann and I married, what were the 3 most important reasons that I chose her, to what extent I did, and I list off those reasons. 10 years later, if you ask me the same questions, there'd be different reasons. Now, they were true 10 years before. I just didn't know it. I hadn't figured it out yet. If you ask me the same question 25 years later, 25 years after being married, so 15 years after that 10, it would be another list. It'd be a better list. It'd be a list of things that I'd come to realize were more important to me than I ever had any idea of knowing. But I didn't understand myself, and I didn't understand her that much. Now, it's not a bad thing. So if you're sitting here and you're going to be married soon, you might be thinking, oh no, I don't have any idea why I'm actually getting married. No, that's not what I said. What I said is you can be right about those things, but you're right about other things and you just don't know what they are yet, or you don't know how important they are. It will work differently for each person a little bit. Part of what I'm saying there is God knows those things. God knows the way that your husband, your wife meets needs, fits with you, can be used in relationship with you to grow you and how you can grow them. And together, one person's definition of marriage is that it's a total relationship, a total knowing for building a life together forever. That's not exactly the way he said it, but that's the way I remembered at this moment. It's building a life together. Both of you not being the right person from the beginning, but becoming more and more the right person for each other. If you have that sense of that you're married to the right person, that's a thing that really, really helps you work hard in your marriage, particularly when it gets difficult. And in most marriages, they will. There will be very difficult times. It's part of the nature of it. Because we, in the culture that I live in the States, and I think in your culture as well, your cultures, we overemphasize marrying the right person. And we mean that person needs to be the right person like right now. Not potential, but right now. But we overemphasize it. And the result of that is, if when we marry, we start to see ways that we're disappointed, ways that maybe we misjudged. One of the most dangerous things to marriage is for a spouse to start to wonder, to entertain the question, did I marry the wrong person? There's been research that shows when someone starts to wonder about, did I marry the wrong person? They start looking for evidence that they married the wrong person. And you can always find it. You can always find it. And in this research, what they realized was that that process gets started, and it takes about 2 years. And toward the end of that 2 years, for many people, they come to the conclusion they married the wrong person. They haven't talked about it. It's been a very private experience. And then this person can come out with this pronouncement of, I never should have married you. Now the truth is, they're probably mistaken. That judgment that they married the wrong person is a product of some disconnect that happens and starting to feel unsafe, and that the other person's not trustworthy, and that they can't trust the other person, and the other person's not engaged with them. And that can happen in little ways that gets multiplied in little ways. Then they start asking that question, and every time there's one of those small things, they start thinking, I married the wrong person, I married the wrong person. They miss me, they don't care about me, they don't trust me, I don't trust them. It was a big mistake. That's something like losing hope. Losing the hope that we together can continue and grow and become really, really connected, really, really solid. Prove that we can be good, we can be people that help each other grow. They lose that hope. And they have no sense of, you see those marks of productive relationships. Faithfulness, grace, and forgiveness. When you lose hope, you don't have much sense of that. You're not really desiring to be faithful to the relationship yourself because it doesn't seem like it's going anywhere. You're not really wanting to exercise grace because you're looking for evidence that you married the wrong person, and you find it. You're not looking for forgiveness, a forgiveness that lets go of making your spouse pay for the ways that your spouse has hurt you or has failed you. If the relationship is productive, where we continue to connect and especially continue to repair, then those elements stay alive. of faithfulness, grace, and forgiveness. This is a point where my title is Helping Couples Grow Through Conflict. This is a point where it can be confusing because from here on out, it doesn't seem like I'm talking about conflict that much. Because I'm going to talk about productive conversation, which is something like productive conflict. So that's how you can work against conflict becoming destructive, by going after conversation, even conflict, that's productive. You see there, it says under A, Conversation 4. I've taken that from a book by a woman named Susan Johnson. There are two versions of this book. The first version was named Hold Me Tight, 7 Conversations for a Lifetime of Love. And this is Conversation 4. This is the one that's the positive conversation, the goal in relationship. The other version is called Created for Connection, the Hold Me Tight Manual for Christian Couples. So after she wrote the first book, she connected with a Christian counselor in Nashville, Tennessee in the States, and wrote the version for Christian counselors. So this point A, B, C, D, and E are about what does this positive, productive conversation look like, that she's calling the Hold Me Tight conversation. I tend to call it about when we are having deep connection together. That first idea in Hold Me Tight is that we're engaging and connecting with each other. She talks about being accessible, responsive, and engaged. If you're counselors or if you have friends who are in one of those marriages where they've given up hope, what I see in my counseling practice over and over and over is people who come with the really serious problems, like they've given up total hope. They think they've married the wrong person. They think it was the worst mistake of their life. And they really believe it. And you can't just talk them out of that. But what I have seen is really every time, even when people come and there's been an affair, every time, that problem started with difficulties in accessibility, responsiveness, and engagement. That when they were just not quite accessible, weren't very responsive in a moment, weren't engaged in a moment, there was a start of a disconnection. And then another moment, and there's maintains that disconnection. God's made us to grow in relationships, and that growth in relationships comes in that connection that we feel. I'll give you a silly example. So 6 or 7 or 8 days ago, when I was making the trip here to Poland, my first leg of my flight was delayed, which meant I was running through the airport in Dallas, trying to catch the plane. They'd actually closed the door, but they opened it back up for me, got on my plane, but my suitcases didn't. And so for the first 3 days here, I did not have my suitcases. So in talking to different people who were very friendly and concerned about that, many of them said the same thing. Well, you really should just carry on your luggage. They were right. They said, you'll learn from this, one of them said. And I was actually thinking, no, actually I've had this happen before, and I know that this can happen, but I couldn't. I had too much to bring. I brought books for the bookstore and all kinds of things. But I didn't say that. They were meaning well. They were trying to help me. The truth is, I didn't need them to tell me what would have been a better thing to do. Don't we do that a lot, though? Even in our marriages? We see our spouse isn't treating us right, so we tell them the better way to do it. What did I need? The best thing, and one person did this, would be to look and say, oh, that's hard. to join me in the frustration and the disappointment and the struggle, so that I would know they'd listened and paid attention and had caught something of what it felt like for me to be very far from home without anything. You know? Yeah. That principle works in everything. For us as spouses, do we pay it enough attention? What's happening to you in this experience? Do we do that when we're disagreeing with each other? Most of us don't. It's not something that we do naturally. We have to grow into it. But unfortunately, before we grow into it, sometimes we can do so much damage that we've created disconnection in the process, and then eroded the trust, and then come to believe that I really can't reach you. You're not accessible. Not enough. That I can't rely on you to respond to me emotionally. I don't know if you value me. Those questions up there. Now, this is a place where we might think about some information that's all over the place, and it's not wrong. Information like, well, you know, men aren't as responsive to women as women are to men. That's correct. But that doesn't mean they can't be. And it doesn't mean they can't be in this relationship. And one of the reasons men are not is they might actually be a little bit more afraid. And so a wife who takes risks and actually invites her, or really does first, you know, is responsive, is open-hearted, shares their own feelings. So it creates models for husband what it might look like. But also, for a wife who lets her husband know, I need that from you. In a kind way, not a finger-pointing way. Hey, you're not doing that. But in a way of, I believe you can do this and I need it from you. It's part of the reason I married you. I know it's hard, but we can do it. We can have a relationship that's different than all the other relationships. That's what marriage should be and can be. So that accessibility, responsiveness, engagement gives us a beginning picture of what this positive, productive relationship, including its conflict, can look like, resulting in a deep level of emotional engagement, naked without shame. Part one of that, letter C, is what I'm sharing with each other, what I'm most afraid of. That requires each one of us to work a little harder, to pay attention to what motivates us. Not very many of us want to admit that fear motivates us more than anything else. I've said to my wife for years, I don't worry about anything. I kind of mean I'm not afraid of anything, of what might happen. There's actually a little bit of truth to that, but it's not necessarily for a good reason. I'm real good at separating from whatever I'm feeling in a moment so I can feel like I'm not worried, where the truth is I am. I am. It's been a growth point in our relationship for me to get a little more honest with myself and start to admit, oh, actually, that's concerning me. There's something I'm afraid of here. You have to do that with yourself first in order to share it with your spouse. Then you see on letter D, part 2, what do I need most from you? And it's important to be open and coherently speak your needs, inviting your spouse into a new dialogue that's accessible, responsive, engaged. The main thing I'm really saying here is for all of us in our marriages to keep wrestling with the opportunity we have to go deeper and broader and have conversation about more of what's actually going on. And what happens is we grow as individuals kind of on our own in preparation for sharing more. We come together then and have discussion about that, and we're both helping each other grow as we discuss that. I can go in my room and think about things that should be different about me, but they're really not different until I put them in play in a relationship. Nothing's actually changed. I mean, I may have and God may have done some work, and maybe in my devotional time with God. You really need to think about it in this way. And that change in perspective is important. But it really doesn't matter for much until I put it in play in a relationship, especially my relationship with my wife. And it's in that repetitive practice of that change that I actually change, that God grows me. And God grows my wife in response. Or if it initiated from her, and I grow in response. Point E there, the quote might be confusing. It's from Susan Johnson. Love is improvisation. She's really saying that when we love another person, a big part of that is learning how that has to change, how our contribution to the person, to the relationship, actually changes as the needs and the fears change with time. Last fall, I had this unusual medical thing where I got pneumonia. That's not unusual. But it was so serious, and I had a serious side effect that was fluid outside the lung. That's not the pneumonia. And that got bad enough that normally it's not a big deal. You just go in the doctor and they get a big needle and they stick it in your back and they drain it out. Is this too much information? You okay? But in my case, it had gotten thick and they couldn't do it. So they tried a tube, which just means a bigger needle. And that didn't work either. So we had to have an operation. And I think it took them a couple hours to put a big hole in my back and scoop out a quart of this thick jello-like stuff. And it had messed that lung up because it had gotten all hard, like leather around that lung. They had to scrape it off, and it just sounds horrible. 100 years ago, probably would have died. Now, nah, not so much. But it was pretty serious. I never felt it to be that serious. I actually felt okay. I wasn't great, but I was kind of okay. And after the surgery, that took a lot of energy out. But I was kind of actually okay. I mean, it didn't hurt much. I didn't take a lot of pain medicine. I was just kind of okay. I just have to rest and get better. But my wife didn't look at it that way. She was really afraid. I mean, realistically afraid. Because she knew there's this possibility that Dan's not going to come through this. That was an interesting place for us. For me, who basically was, trying to say to people, I feel better than you think I do. And anything that Carol Ann was doing, like, that's too heavy, you shouldn't be picking this up, because I wasn't supposed to pick up more than 10 pounds, and I might have been picking up something 5 pounds, and, and she's worried, and she's saying that. And it's one thing if I'm thinking about, I'm feeling okay, and I want to live as much as I possibly can live and do as much as I possibly can do as I recover in this, and respond to her in probably not the best way when she's saying, you sure you can pick that up? Versus if I could find that ability to be sensitive to what's happening in her and what she's feeling like and the fears that are going on, then my response is different. Not quite as harsh, actually. The other one, I didn't say it this way, it wasn't terribly harsh, but the other one was sort of like, I'm okay, you can leave me alone, I'm all right, I'm a big boy, I can decide. Versus, maybe the words weren't that different, but I understand. I really think this is okay. I'm really feeling okay. And the left, I'm not using my left arm, I'm using the other one, and that really seems to be working pretty, that's a different kind of responding to her fear rather than just being really concerned, mostly concerned about me. What I'm saying there is an example of what's written here in point B. The best guide in our interactions is each other's emotions. It goes on to say, just like the best guide for the jazz musician when doing improvisation is to be attuned to the other members of the group. The best guide for spouses is to be attuned to the emotions of the other spouse. And all it takes is practice. It takes the decision, the perspective, the understanding of, and it just takes practice. Every day. Reminding yourself every day. Paying attention to when you're not tuning in and you're just coming out of your own stuff versus let me tune in to what you really need right now and what you're afraid of and what are the emotions around that, and to try to respond like that. So maybe the easiest way to understand that is this nature of good conversation, which are expressed here in Path 1, Path 2, Path 3. This is from the work of a man named Daniel Weil, W-I-L-E. Dan.weil.com is a good website to go to get some ideas. And I didn't move my outline. What Dan Weil is saying is that I'm trying to describe here another way to pay attention to each other's emotions and stuff. In any relational moment, there are only three options. There are two of them, I think, showing there. Okay? The first one is to attack or defend. There's a quote up there, and it relates to this situation. Dan himself has had a good moment at work. He's excited to share it with his wife about this positive thing that's happened. Maybe it was a conversation with his boss. I forget what he said. His wife's name is Alice. He's driving home and he's very excited to talk to Alice about this thing that's happened. Comes in the house and Alice is talking on the phone, having a really good conversation. Well, he's okay with that, and he can wait until she's done, but that conversation goes on for a long time. And so it starts to get annoying. He's feeling something about it that's bothering him. So Alice finally gets off the phone with her friend Gail. He has three choices. Now, it's important to think about and realize that these are not choices. We don't always realize we're making a choice. We just have something happen and we react to it. So part of what's helpful for all of us is to work hard to slow things down. And I think for me that means, and for many, for people I work with, that means paying attention to when you start to get a little upset. That's a sign. If you could right now think about for yourself, when you're in one of those situations and you're starting to feel that stress, that disturbance, can you locate where you feel it? For me, I feel it right there. And can you describe what it feels like? For me, it feels like pressure pushing on me. Because it's right there, I guess, it feels like I'm being pushed all over, but it's really mostly right there. Most of the time we don't recognize it. By asking that question, you may have been able to do that. You might have to take a little bit more time than I've given you. But what we can do if we identify that is we can start to look for it. And then when we see it, it can become a trigger for different behavior. When I feel that, if I don't recognize it, I automatically go into an habitual reaction. One of these first two things, negative things. If I recognize it and can name it, then I go, oh, it's a moment to slow down and think about how I'm going to respond. Okay? Clearest example for me is if I go to a store and we're going to buy something big, maybe we need a new refrigerator. That's what I remember this actually happening. And you probably maybe have been through that. I don't know how they work in your country, but in my country, the first time you say, no, I think I'll think about it, or I don't want to do that today, then they're going to come with a reason why you should do it today. Well, you can keep it for 30 days free, no problem. We can always return it if you don't like it. Don't you want to do it now? We have it on sale. And then if you say no again, they have another reason. Well, somewhere around when they're putting that more pressure on, go ahead and decide today, I start to feel that. If I don't recognize it, I'll buy the refrigerator I don't want, just to get out of that situation. I'll be thinking, we can return it. I'll just be hearing their words. I'm not very assertive, and people can push me into things, especially if I'm not paying attention to that. If I pay attention to it and recognize, oh, this is one of those situations. This person's pushing me, and I'm feeling that push. I don't need to do what they want. I have to do some thinking about, it's really okay. I'm not a bad person if I don't do what they want. And then in that moment, I can say, no. I understand what you're saying, but I'm really not sure this is the refrigerator for us. And I can leave. If they continue to try, at that point, I'm just looking at them as being too persistent. And I don't have to take it quite so personally. So figuring out, that's about these things that we do by habit that we often don't think about, to try to slow down and recognize, where do we experience that in our body? Then that feeling can become a trigger to slow down and think more, rather than and then think more, respond in the way that we want to, rather than just reacting. So, but the first path there, first reaction, is to attack or defend, where you express some element of what you're experiencing, but in the form of a complaint. You see the quote. So Alice gets off the phone with Gail. Dan has his opportunity to speak finally. He's been waiting forever. And in this attack, he says, how come you always have so much to say to your friends and so little to say to me? You take an element of the truth and blow it up into an attack, and an unrealistic attack, actually. In this second column, Dan Weil says something that's crucial. This turns your partner into an enemy and invites a fight, an adversarial cycle. Or, path 2, can avoid, ignore, downplay. You keep what you are experiencing to yourself and talk about something else. Alice gets off the phone. Anything good on TV tonight? I don't know. Let's go see. And they sit quietly, not talking, watching TV. Both in a withdrawn state. Because it turns your partner into a little bit of a stranger. And it triggers a withdrawn cycle, typically. But if Daniel can find enough self-compassion, you might say, to be comfortable enough with the fact that I'm feeling this feeling, and it's really not a bad thing. It's not that I'm a child or too childish. It's a natural thing. That things like this happen in the best relationships. It's okay. And in that, then he can confide. Bring your partner in on what you're experiencing. You take in what your partner is trying to tell you. Turns your partner into an ally. So Daniel says, I'm jealous of how much fun you were having talking to Gail on the phone just now. So Gail has an opportunity as an ally to respond to that and to respond to the feeling that Daniel has expressed in terms of what happened in that moment, that she had no idea. When she's attacked, she has to be like, I'm going to defend myself because I didn't do anything like that. When the withdrawal happens, it has to be a mystery. I don't know what's going on here, but I can feel it. When the confiding happens, there's no mystery. It's clear. It's understandable. And now they have a chance to have a conversation where they repair. Where Alice can say, oh, I don't want you to feel that way. Gail's not more important than you are. Now we're responsive, accessible, engaged. Just by confiding instead of attacking or withdrawing. Daniel Weil says, intimacy, knowing each other well, being connected. Intimacy is just a sentence away. It's really true. He goes on to say, but it's hard to find the sentence.